You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. You know it's lonely at the front desk today, fellow travelers. Just old Mike here. Kate's stuck in traffic. Geoff is at the Motel Atlantico. But fear not, Kate will waltz into the strategy suite later. And we have a special strategy suite guest here today as well, who will bring her experience as a political centrist to inform us how one keeps on the straight and narrow during this time of perilous polarization. Before we get to our guest today, though, I just want to say news has just reached me that John Horgan is receiving treatment for thyroid cancer. And our best wishes to John as he, in his own words, lives long and prospers. So I hope he's back at it again and back in the embassy in Berlin representing Canada before too long. So we have a best-selling podcast today with a best-selling author, Daniel Marshall. Dan's new book, Untold Tales of Old British Columbia, is flying off bookshelves in BC and across Canada. Even Amazon is demanding that more old-growth trees be sacrificed for the good of the reading public. Such is the success of this book. Now, it's a book that's especially important this week as we head into Canada Day. BC's role in Canada's history gets short shrift, in my opinion. So who is Dan? Dan is a historian specializing in British Columbia and First Nations history. He's written an acclaimed book on the Fraser River War of 1858 called Claiming the Land, an award-winning book. And he's written an authorized history of the Cowichan people, those who fell from the sky. He's also taught BC politics at UVic over the years. He knows his history and he knows his politics too. If you've ever wandered into the Bent Mass pub in James Bay, you might find him hectoring someone about the Wacom administration of the 1880s or arguing the finer points of the Yale Convention. But that's only part of what this new book that he's done is an anthology of 40 stories that weave a narrative about BC. We've often heard through our textbooks that BC just kind of happened after all the Eastern Canadians came out west and brought us into Canada. But to hear Dan say it, it's a north-south story. That's a totally different pattern of history, unique in Canada. And Dan's book walks us through it in a very compelling and readable way. So welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Dan Marshall.
Thank you very much, Mike. My great pleasure.
Well, first of all, I wore a shirt for you. There you go.
Well done.
BC coat of arms for those not watching on YouTube. What is, we got on the coat of arms, it's a Wapiti? Is that a Wapiti?
I believe so.
Yeah. You don't know for sure? I thought you were a historian.
Well, I do, but I'll tell you a little personal story about that coat of arms, and that is that Canon Beanlands, who devised that particular coat of arms, in fact, married my great-grandparents at Christchurch Cathedral here in Victoria, way back when.
Oh, you always have to put yourself in the middle of the story.
It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, you know, congratulations on the book. The book's selling well. Is it surpassed your expectations?
It continues to grow. It just went up another notch on the BC bestseller list. I think we're standing at number 3 now. Our biggest problem was keeping up with demand. You know, on its official release date at the end of April, it sold out completely on Amazon. So we've been sort of hustling ever since to keep the books flowing and keep shelves stocked. But it's doing incredibly well. I'm very pleased, very gratified. And I don't know, I felt that really Untold Tales of Old British Columbia would fill a hole, so to speak. There's a great thirst for British Columbia history in this province. And I think the success of the book is a measure of just that. People are very keen to know more about the history of this province.
And now explain the Pacific Slope, because it's not a description that people are necessarily familiar with. What do you mean when you talk about BC on the Pacific Slope?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we're more familiar these days with the Pacific Northwest, or dare I say, Canada's Southwest. But certainly in earlier writings, Pacific Slope was always the designation used for the West Coast, Alaska, British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, California, all the way down the Pacific Slope. And in previous writings, some well-known historians of the time period, H. Bancroft out of the United States, others, I won't list them all, this was a term that they frequently used, and one which I find quite compelling, and so have adopted in my work now for the last many decades. But really, what are we talking about? We're talking about the Pacific Slope, or west of the Rocky Mountains. You know, the geography here naturally lends itself to a north-south flow. So this is very much what Untold Tales is about, placing British Columbia in that context. And, you know, whether it's the indigenous populations we find along the coast, they certainly weren't defined by a 49th parallel, this international divide that was rather arbitrarily drawn across the map. It certainly didn't define the early European explorations, you know, the Spanish coming up from San Blas, Mexico, to establish their fort at Nootka.
Or the Russians?
Or the Russians coming down, or, you know, so on and so forth. So when I first started placing BC in a more of a north-south perspective, really in some ways I was bucking the trend, the academic trend for sure, which has always sought to place British Columbia within the new east-west alignment of a transcontinental state. And I always took exception with this. Well-known theories like the Laurentian School, or you know, Harold Innis, Canada.
The
Canada was
Canadian
created.
dream. The Canadian dream.
Canada was created not in spite of its geography, but because of it. Harold Innis.
Yeah.
But there has always been this fundamental problem, and what was that? The Rocky Mountains. So if you look at the early explorations coming across, let's say the expedition of Captain Palliser, looking for a practicable route through the Rockies, it just didn't happen. He ended up having to go down the Columbia River and take a steamship up to Victoria to complete his trip across the continent, you know. So it's never really felt well. The British Columbia has never fit this national puzzle particularly well. So Untold Tales of Old British Columbia seeks to re-examine these natural north-south flows. And of course, the gold rush is a great example of that.
Well, so obviously, at the time of the gold rush, time of Confederation, there was no railway to Eastern Canada. So the pattern of migration to British Columbia was from the south, from basically San Francisco.
Yes,
and that's quite right. And so San Francisco, the rail line connected through continental U.S. to San Francisco. Then they come up, I guess, jump on the boat and up to Victoria.
That's right. People were coming either around the Horn, across the Isthmus, or you know, across the continent to San Francisco, the major port. And it, you know, our family have been here for some time, right? I'm 5 generations here, and the tourism industry, we often like to view Victoria as a bit of old Britain. But really, my view is more in keeping with the old provincial archivist Willard Ireland, who believed that no, Victoria is more of a bit of old San Francisco. I mean, you just look at the architecture here. If you walk along places like Wharf Street and look at some of the old building facades, you'll see that. And so we've sort of lost some of this connection. The power of the 49th parallel really has been in the building of these national narratives, our national identities, whether Canadian or American. You know, once these transcontinental lines are built, Sir Johnny McDonald's national dream was very much about reorienting these north-south flows into an east-west alignment.
So before that happened, you've written a lot about who exactly came up during the first major surge of migration in the 1850s with the gold rush. It was a multicultural event, in your words. Like,
Yes.
through your research, like, throw us a bit of a flavor of that. What was the diasporas coming up to what we now know as British Columbia?
Well, you're quite right. I mean, it's one of the most multicultural events on the world. It is true that the earlier fur trade period in the Columbia Department could also be deemed very multicultural, with the mixed race families, the custom of the country whereby fur traders were partnering, marrying with First Nations peoples and whatnot. That's also true. But the gold rush itself, certainly, you have every race under the sun attending these rushes. Of course, let's remember that the Fraser River Gold Rush of 1858 was indeed the third great mass migration of gold seekers in search of a new El Dorado, following that of the California Rush, which we all know quite well, in 1849, or indeed the rush to Australia in the early 1850s. And by 1858, all within the space of about 1 decade, you now have this third great rush to the Fraser River. And so Untold Tales also examines these connections. And really to say that in our subsequent history writings of British Columbia, we've tended to downplay the American connection. And yet the American presence, certainly during these formative years, certainly before we joined Canada, were very predominant. And so I discussed this in some detail.
Mm-hmm. So during that time as well, there was, well, you mentioned the fur trade, and at that time there was more of a business-like arrangement, I guess, with Indigenous people. I'm not sure how you would characterize it. That's probably not the right way to say it, but there wasn't a lot of settlement at the time, and there was a lot of trade between the forts and the local populations. Then over time, the immigration through the gold rush and thereafter increased. But at some point, you've talked in the past. Well, Governor Douglas was sympathetic to First Nations during his administration. He was part Indigenous himself, and
Scotch West Indian.
right, and yet somehow in the decades that followed in BC, BC kind of went another route after that.
Well, exactly. I mean, the gold rush in British Columbia is decidedly different from the gold rush in California. Why is that? In part, it is the presence of the Hudson's Bay Company. Let's remember, too, the Hudson's Bay Company had a post right in San Francisco when California was still part of the Spanish world, in the port of Yerba Buena, as it was called then. And so their influence up and down the coast was quite immense. But how is it different? Well, there's this custom of the country, these partnerships that were definitely business partnerships. But my sense of the fur trade period is that the Hudson's Bay Company, especially under someone like Governor James Douglas, sought to build these partnerships, sought to protect these partnerships very much so. And so he had a decidedly different view from the kind of mindset that would come up with the main California rush of, well, we say at a conservative estimate, 35,000 gold seekers came up in like 6 months, space of 6 months to a year. Some suggest in contemporary accounts it could have been as much as 100,000. We just simply don't know because there was no civil authority on the ground. We haven't even got the 49th parallel marked out on the ground in 1858. But for the Hudson's Bay Company, it seems to my mind, in their business operations, it could be argued they worked very much within the Indigenous system of customs, of Indigenous law itself. And it wasn't really till the formal proclamation of the Crown Colony of British Columbia that you then had the implementation of British law and order. And that's what makes it so different from California. This is one of the primary reasons why, within this multicultural rush, that you would have, for instance, the many of the Black American population based in San Francisco who were being discriminated against would come north to Victoria. They made a decision as people of color. You could not give testimony in a court of law to a white person, to use but one example. And so they weren't being treated well. Governor Douglas made an invitation to these Black pioneers in California, and many hundreds came north at the time of the rush. One in particular, who's better known, is that of Mifflin Gibbs. Now, Mifflin Gibbs came up. He was a freedom fighter. They had a Black American newspaper in San Francisco at that time. He had associations with the famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass. And when he came north to highlight the difference, he would ultimately be elected to the Victoria City Council in the 1860s, and in fact acted as the acting mayor of Victoria for a time. So he was up here. He raised a family. One of his daughters was born right here in James Bay, just a couple of blocks down from where I am at the moment. And this young woman went on to become the Secretary Treasurer of the French Pan-National Congress in the 1920s. Just amazing. Gibbs, of course, ultimately, after the American Civil War concludes, goes back to the US, and he becomes the first Black American judge in American history in Arkansas. So an extraordinary story. Well, we could go further. The Chinese peoples that came up, I write about this in Untold Tales. Again, the high water mark of persecution of Chinese peoples in the California goldfields was certainly in around the mid-1850s. And so by the time of the rush to Fraser River in 1858, many of them had decided to leave. They were being driven from their claims. Of course, they had instituted the foreign miners' head tax. And I look at one story I've tracked down. I've just been doing a bit more research of late, actually, on this one individual known by the name of Tong Achik. Tong Achik had been educated in an English language school in Hong Kong, ultimately traveled to California, where he became the chief spokesperson for the Chinese population in San Francisco, in California. He would have direct one-on-one representations with the then governors of California. And when the 1858 rush hits, all of this persecution that they're experiencing compels them to come up to Victoria and buy the first 20 town lots in what is today Canada's oldest Chinatown. Now, Tong Achik, unfortunately, I can't, he left. In the little bit that's written about this extraordinary individual, it's claimed that he left California in 1857 and went back to China, back to Hong Kong and subsequently Shanghai. But from my research, no, in 1858, he's in Bellingham Bay, at Whatcom, which was one of the rival ports to Victoria during the time of the Fraser River Gold Rush. He's in Victoria. We have the evidence for this in the BC archives. So that's fascinating in itself. But I've since learned when he returns to China, he becomes like the chief comprador, I think, for 20 years with the famous British company Jardines and Matheson, and has an amazing career in China. He lives till about 1897, where he is today deemed one of the key leaders of the Westernization movement in China. So there's much more there yet to uncover. So what do we have here? We have Black peoples now in Victoria who could give testimony in a court of law, who would have equality under the law, as certainly Governor Douglas enforced, or people like Sir Matthew Bailey Begbie, the judge here in British Columbia. And we have these Black people made important contributions here. Absolutely. We have the Chinese peoples here who were grateful to be here. In Untold Tales, I quote from a petition in the 1860s held in the local newspaper, the British Colonist at the time, where it's reported, and where they are basically thanking old Governor Douglas for having reversed the California policy. So, I mean, there was no foreign miners' head tax here at that time. There was a universally applied crown licensing system, right? Everybody had to take out one of these crown licenses and essentially acknowledge British sovereignty during this year of chaos. So very, very different from what was happening south of the border. But if we broaden the context even further, in the case of Douglas, we have to remember that until 1849, with the creation of the colony of Vancouver Island, that's when Douglas arrives. He travels up from Fort Vancouver. But what did he experience prior to coming? More and more American settlers have been taken to the Oregon Trail, coming into the Columbia River District. Ultimately, their numbers gained to such numbers that the Oregon Provisional Government, which was sort of a compact between the HBC and these new American arrivals, ultimately became weighted in the Americans' favor. So what did they do? They started passing racist legislation. Again, if you were a Black person or part Black or Indigenous or Hawaiian, so on and so forth, you could not give testimony in a court of law. This is quite extraordinary. It means by those provisions that even someone like Governor Douglas, as a mixed race individual, West Indian and Scottish, or his wife, of course, who was part Native, that by these provisions, they would not be able to give evidence in a court of law. So, long story short, this is what really, I think, informs early British Columbia. Equality under the law for all, enforced by Douglas and Begbie, and really a refuge for many individuals that were rushing not just to get gold, but in many instances rushing here for freedom.
So BC had this kind of unique history, certainly before Confederation, when Douglas was leading the colony. And Douglas retires. BC ultimately joins Confederation in Canada. And then early administrations in British Columbia chose not to follow a route that had happened in the rest of Canada in terms of negotiating treaties. And what happened there? Why, in your estimation, why did BC not follow the pattern that had extended across the prairies? With some exceptions, there were some treaties, but most of Crown land not covered by treaties, which is obviously echoing today.
You've certainly asked a complex question, which we could take much time on. But to cut to the quick, why did British Columbia not conclude treaties with Indigenous nations other than the so-called Fort Victoria treaties or Douglas treaties on southern Vancouver Island and up at Fort Rupert on the north end of the island? And I would have to say the reason is this, that the imperial government never issued express direction to undertake treaty making. If you look at the draft charter by which Vancouver Island would become a colony, a proprietary colony of Britain, in the draft charter, there is a reference to, whatever was incumbent upon Her Majesty, Queen Victoria, would now, devolve to, in this case, the Hudson's Bay Company. And so the Hudson's Bay Company did take it upon themselves to conclude certain treaties on Vancouver Island. But certainly by the time of the creation of the Crown Colony of mainland British Columbia in 1858, there was never any directive issued to make treaty making. I don't talk about the full extent of that in Untold Tales, but I think some important context, which really most are not aware of here, is that following the Treaty of Waitangi in New Zealand, a different government subsequently came to power in the United Kingdom. They had something called the New Zealand Select Committee, I think of about 1844, which had presided over the claims of the Indigenous peoples of New Zealand, in which they stated, while a treaty had been issued, in the case of New Zealand, which recognized a blanket interest, if you will, to Indigenous title of those lands, this is a policy, in their view, that should never have happened, and they would ensure it would never happen again. Now, the reason I mention that is because Lord Grey, who chaired that committee, subsequently went on to become the Secretary of State for the Colonies. And so he is the Secretary of State for the Colonies in 1849, the year that Vancouver Island is made a colony of Britain. So when you look at the final charter, there is no reference to making treaty with Indigenous peoples. And increasingly what you find instead of that, there's always a clause, essentially a guarantee, more generally, that speaks of protecting, Indigenous peoples, their welfare and protection. So I'm probably a bit of an odd person out on that, but that's seemingly the truth of it. And by the time, BC does join Canada, you do have someone like Joseph Trutch, rather infamous in the eyes of so many, and rightly so in many instances, who states quite explicitly to then Prime Minister Sir John A. McDonald, look, if you want to extend the Canadian policy with regard to First Nations west of the Rocky Mountains, you can do that if you want, but you will have to basically redo everything out here, because that has not been the policy of British Columbia, because there was never any directive from Britain. And so if you want to take this on, you will have to pay. And of course, this goes right back to Article number 1 of the Terms of Union, pre-existing debts and liabilities. BC governments of the past used to argue that, at this juncture, after all of these many, many court cases, the courts prefer to see the federal and provincial governments working together in a similar direction. But at one time, it was just that. When the Terms of Union were created, like every other colony, whether it was PEI, New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario, or in this case, British Columbia, any pre-existing debts were assumed by the federal authority. So for a long time, the provincial government's response would be, look, we stated clearly what our position was. You said, oh, okay, maybe we'll just leave that alone for now and worry about trying to harmonize that and many other policies down the road. So it was unfinished business. But from the British Columbia point of view in those early years, it was, if you want to harmonize the BC policy with that of Canada, this new made in Canada numbered treaty process that started evolving across certainly the prairie provinces, you can do that, but you will have to pay, right? So this is what bogged down the whole Indian reservation question too. BC had established comparatively smaller reserves. Of course, these were fish-based societies, and in the thinking of the time, they felt they had no use for larger tracts of land, and unlike the prairie provinces where there's such substantial land, the fact that in this province, only about 3% of our entire land base in this province is actually arable land. When we lost the Southern Oregon Territory with the drawing of the 49th parallel, we really got kind of screwed. Now, I don't have the statistics at hand, but I hazard to guess that in the state of Washington today, the amount of arable land must be at least 10 times or more greater than what BC was left with. And this is why I find it astounding right now, this talk about wanting to bring back Sumas Lake, after these devastating floods we've had again. Well, where does all of our agriculture come from?
Be flooding a lot of raspberries. or blueberry,
Well,
whatever the hell they're
where
doing out there.
where's it coming? And with climate change, whether you agree with it or not, the increasing droughts we're finding, whatnot, where will the food come? Anyways, that's getting
Well,
off topic a little
we've
bit.
certainly established your creds. So as far as the book goes, people can check out Untold Tales, Old British Columbia, and 40 different tales, and you can read it back to front, front to back. Jump to story number 17 and go to 23. It doesn't really matter. They all kind of weave together ultimately. And
Uh,
but I
that's
won't.
right. And I've attempted to offer a book that can not only offer some of our foundational history in this province, just how this place called British Columbia came into being, but I hope, quite frankly, at this juncture, in this polarized world that we live, that people will find I have quite a few eclectic stories in there that should be rather fun to read too. What did I say? Fun. A bit of fun in this rather polarized, shame-blaming world. I think we
They're
need to move on
bite-sized
from.
pieces. They are. Now, while I have you here, I want to talk BC politics. And I have Kate Hammer would say I am maybe an obsession with turning points in political history when parties get realigned. And I've been suggesting that we're at that stage now today where there's a fundamental realignment happening on the right, and we've seen this before. But you've done some research on this in the past, and I think you have some knowledge of how the first real coalition came about in the 40s, coming out of Duff Patello, the Liberal premier, and his administration kind of fell apart, and John Hart, his finance minister, they had a rift, and he ended up as the premier, leading him and the Conservatives together. Like, what does anything strike you as a parallel from back then to modern times today?
Well, I think the parallel is, as you well know, just my sense of the politics right now is we are at a turning point. When the population becomes discontent, they want to change. It's so often the case. And I think we're at that stage right now. It wouldn't be the first time. But truthfully, I should just back up a little bit. Long before I got onto the Fraser River Gold Rush, my master's degree focused particularly on the non-party period of BC politics. So what is that? Well, from the time of joining Canada in 1871 up until 1903, there were no party politics in this province until the time of Sir Richard McBride in 1903. And of course, he stands out in bold relief because he held power for so very long as a Conservative. But when I was researching my master's degree, I did something different for the time. I was actually at that time known as one of only two new political historians in Canada, because I'd used these rather new social science methods where I actually number crunched all the votes of the BC legislature through the late colonial period, through certainly the 19th century, to try to find out just what were the political alignments in this province. We still don't look at that period enough. Old Dr. Margaret Ormsby, who authored British Columbia history way back in 1958, always felt that this was one of the holes, if you will, in our knowledge of BC, that nobody had really looked at the non-party period to any degree. So this is what I set out to do. And by letting the votes speak for themselves, I used something rather complex called multidimensional analysis, where all the votes would be spread out in a two-dimensional space to see who was voting with who. And there were some surprising things. First, one, it had always been said that the main political divide or alignment in British Columbia during this period was the island, the older colony of Vancouver Island, versus the mainland. What did I conclude from number? I entered about 50,000, 100,000 pieces of information and whatnot. Well, that just did not particularly hold water, the island versus mainland divide, which was so legendary. And really, the politics of the time were issue-based. So, getting back to the terms of union, one of the things we agreed to was to take on the Canadian system of tariffs. And I talked to this a certain degree in my book, Untold Tales. And that issue, the introduction of the tariff system, which offered less protection than the old British Columbia tariff, became the central alignment, if you will, those for and against. And it really displayed something else, our first rural-urban splits. Now, there's something else to talk about, because I think what we're seeing again today is typically a rural-urban split, whether it's, the Socreds of the past or the Liberal Party, now the United Party or the Conservative Party. Their base is outside of the urban areas. And this is so often the case. Well, it all starts back with the adoption of the Canadian system of tariffs, another issue that was left for another day because it was such a difficult issue. Railways were a difficult issue. Indigenous peoples, the transfer responsibility of Native peoples to the feds was a difficult issue. And also the introduction of the Canadian system of tariffs. So it was adopted just by a single vote. Extraordinary. The legislature then was so polarized. But we did adopt the Canadian system of tariffs. And what was the consequence of that? Well, many predicted that for agricultural interests, it would be the death knell, because we would be flooded with cheap California produce, among other things. So, this side of British Columbia has been lost to such a degree, even with the coming of the railway, the institution of a biased freight rate, some would argue essentially led to the early deindustrialization of British Columbia. You think of companies like Albion Iron Works building everything from wood stoves to steam engines here. Well, that all collapsed once BC started to be flooded with cheap Ontario manufacturers. So this is what I try to look at in the book, is how British Columbia is unique, how it doesn't fit the nationalist narrative particularly well. And what better describes these early years? It's this California connection, of course, which Victoria, even after Confederation, continues with, certainly well into the 1930s at least, with its maritime focus outlook. So getting back to, people like Duff Patello, well, I have Robin Fisher's book right here because I reviewed it about 30 years ago for a journal back east. Typically, who were the great premiers? We always focus on Sir Richard McBride, Duff Patello, John Hart.
Who does David Eby remind
Bennett.
you of? Is there a historical parallel for the premier?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
In terms of a previous premier, no, I can't think of one.
Yeah, he does.
But
he's a unique cat.
I think he's a unique cat. Now, if you'd said someone like a John Horgan, maybe that would be easier, because clearly, the leaders that have succeeded, and by the measure being used to include in this elite group, McBride, John Hart, W.A.C. Bennett, or Duff Patello, it's usually on how long have they held power. Well, by that measure, I would go back to this non-party period, because you mentioned earlier George Anthony Walkham. I mean, how many people know that to this very day, he is the only premier who was defeated, the only premier who actually came back and was reelected? Populism is very much the key in this province. I mean, Sir Richard McBride, the people's dick, as he was known back then. My grandfather always talked about Dickie McBride. And I might just share that quick story. When Dr. Margaret Ormsby was writing British Columbia history. In her first edition of that book that came out for the BC Centennial in 1958, she had one chapter devoted to Sir Richard McBride, and that chapter was entitled The People's Dick. Now, subsequently, some of our UBC confreres took her aside and said, well, gee, Margaret, you might want to reconsider that title for obvious reasons, apparent to us today at least. And so then in second editions, he became known as the People's Choice. I bring that up in part because Robin Fisher, in his book on Duff Patello, you will probably be aware, made a reference in his foreword to redinking history. Why would he say redinking history, as a bit of a joke? And he said, well, for people who know their British Columbia history, they would get this joke. Well, what was that? It was a bit of a play on an earlier work that had come out called Rethinking History. I forget the author's name in this moment. But obviously he was making reference to this earlier Ormsby, the people's dick notion, rethinking history. Because at that time, universities, as they've become, for lack of a word, more progressive, the slow, decades-long dismantling of old narratives, national narratives, the micro-studies looking at race, diversity, gender questions. For Fisher to come out with a book like Duff Patello, weren't many people writing biographies of old white guys at that time. So that was the inside joke. He was redinking history, as an aside.
Well, hopefully no one calls you the people's dick. The people's Dan. Dan, I'd like to, we could go on and on and on. Your knowledge of BC history and politics is impressive, but we'll hope to have you back on some other time, and wishing you all the best as books continue to fly off the bookshelves.
Well, I deeply appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me along. It's great. You've got a great show and you're doing a great public service for this province.
Guess, I love games. From card games like Euchre and Dutch Blitz to board games like Scrabble and Settlers of Catan. I don't care what it is, or if I'm particularly good at it, count me in. One of my all-time favorites is Balderdash. It's a word game in which participants invent a definition for words and turns of phrase that are at once obscure and unknowable, but often also weirdly familiar. And there's one term I keep hearing that I keep thinking would be perfect for a round of Balderdash. That term is the Internet of Things. Like, I kind of know what it means, but I'm left wondering, is there internet without things? The internet of spirits? Of metaphor? Impermanence? What came first, the internet or the things? The truth is that the definition is one that feels too simple, too literal to actually be true. Because the technical definition of the Internet of Things is the integration of the internet into everyday things. And here, you can see why this enigmatic turn of phrase is coming up more and more. Because as computer chips have become smaller and cheaper to build, and as high bandwidth telecommunication has become more widely available, more and more things of different shapes, sizes, durability, and manufacturing cost have become connected to the internet. Think cars, doorbells, toothbrushes, vacuum cleaners, even Alexa. And more recently, a network of sensors scattered throughout 85 hectares of forest around Yale, BC, a township on the Fraser River, halfway between Vancouver and Kelowna. These solar-powered sensors provide ultra-early wildfire detection through large-scale Internet of Things networks that detect fires as early as the smoldering phase. They are made by Dryad Networks, a Berlin-based startup that specializes in early warning monitoring for wildfires, as well as health and growth monitoring solutions for forests. Having linked into TELUS's wireless networks, these sensors are part of a Canadian pilot project to assist in forest fire detection and, ultimately, suppression before they spiral into dangerous wildfires. And TELUS is also investing in Dryad through their Pollinator Fund, making it a triple word score for hometown team TELUS, who are building out connectivity and emergency preparedness while investing in solutions that serve BC.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Well, stop the presses. It's Kate Hammer.
Hello.
Kate, did you get confused in a four-way crosswalk, multi-directional crosswalk by any chance?
Yeah, just totally discombobulated, wandered my way to Ontario.
Too many bike lanes, probably, on the way to Hotel Pacifico today. And we haven't had, next week we'll have Ham and Meggs back.
God, does anyone use that?
Finally got to say it, Ham and Meggs.
Yeah, Geoff's back next week.
Be reunited next week in the Strategy Suite. But we have a stranger here today. Kate, who's this?
I'm very excited to introduce someone who's actually a mutual friend of ours. It's a great pleasure to welcome Sarah Sidhu to the Strategy Suite today. Sarah is no stranger to politics. She was a political staffer for the Honorable Herb Dhaliwal across 3 departments during the Chrétien administration. She went on to get a real job as a lawyer and volunteered her time as co-chair of Justin Trudeau's election campaign in BC in 2015, and in various campaign and executive roles for the BC Liberal Party as a volunteer. Sarah, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Kate. Mike, it's nice to see you. Nice to see you both.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
This is fun because I think Mike and I both tend to chit chat with you and text you about political stuff. So now we're just bringing this text chains to the pod.
Yes, exactly. It's exciting for me. My first pod, which is like my live text, like translating to pod. So that's great.
Well, I'm glad you could join us on this auspicious day after the federal Liberals have just lost one of the safest seats in Canada in the St. Paul's by-election. The results just came out at like 4:00 in the morning Eastern time today. What the heck? What's going on? What's the analysis?
Well, it's so interesting. I went to bed thinking that, Leslie was about 800 up. And then I woke up this morning to the news reports that that was not the case. I think it's interesting timing. It's disappointing, obviously. I think for the people that care about politics, and I think for federal Liberals, it probably is.
Liberals that care about politics.
Yes, exactly. Liberals that care about politics.
Some people not disappointed.
Yes, I understand.
Most in fact.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting
mathematically speaking.
It's funny. It's an interesting one because, Trudeau's in Vancouver today, and I did a quick search to try and figure out what he was in Vancouver for and couldn't figure it out because everything's just asking him about this result. And I think it's interesting because I think people are talking a lot about what it says, like about the Liberal loss, and maybe a little bit less so about the Conservative victory.
Correct.
Right? Like, do you want, but in fairness, the Liberal loss is worth a little bit of spending some time on, because this is a riding that, it was held by Carolyn Bennett since 97.
I want to say 28 years or something like that, 28 plus years.
Right. And a Liberal member before that. Like, it's been a safe seat for a long time. It's kind of, I like to think of St. Paul's as like the kind of uptown close sister to University Rosedale, which is Chrystia Freeland's riding, right? But I think Chrystia Freeland actually even lives in St. Paul's. Like, that riding, automatically you've got some of Canada's most powerful people as your constituents. It's been safe. It's been safely Liberal for a long time. It's got sort of parts of Rosedale and some really fancy neighborhoods in it. It's also got a lot of density because the Bloor line runs like kind of along the southern border, and then both the kind of arms of the Yonge line run through it, which with a lot of kind of, it's a high proportion of renters in that area. So it is a pretty mixed and interesting riding, predominantly white, if I recall, and I'm not out of date. Sarah, what do you think? What do you think's happening? Like, how are people digesting this within the Liberal Party this morning?
Yeah, I think people are, I was surprised going to bed. I was concerned about 2 weeks out, and I thought, okay, let's see how things are going. And then I had gone to Ottawa and I heard things were going in the right direction. And, and yesterday I felt like things were going in the right direction. But waking up this morning, was I shocked? No, I was not shocked. By-elections can be unpredictable. There's a sentiment, there's the PM is the lightning rod for all wrongs right now. I'm just waiting to see that he's blamed for the Oilers' loss yesterday. But, this is politics and things can change overnight. Leslie was a good candidate. I read this morning that she plans on running again in the next election, which I think is great. But I also think for someone like the PM and the insight I have, I haven't spent a ton of time with him, but through the 2015 campaign, I spent from 2013 to 2015 with him. And I would say that nothing's more motivating to him than a loss, right? I think the challenge
Well,
is
Sarah, I mean, he should be pretty motivated by now. I mean, the poll numbers haven't been very good for a
Okay,
while.
now he's motivated. No, not now.
No,
now.
no. And that's some of the jokes that are going around this morning as well. But I
Well-
think if I'm the PM today, I'm going to take the time to actually really dig in and reflect and really examine what went wrong. If I can do that, and if I can
I just
change
don't know
my-
if he's going to have a lot of reflection time afforded to him.
And that's the
Well,
question.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
question, I think. But if he digs in and reflects and changes tact, I think, and does the work, I think Canadians will notice, right? We're all paying attention.
Yeah.
We're very focused. We're a year away from an election. And I think there's a lot riding on this election as well, in terms of, I think you have two really different policy approaches from two clear choices.
Okay, but
Right?
if he manages to fend this off internally, then it's a Houdini-esque performance for him.
I agree.
Because
It's not easy.
It's just that this was supposed to be a relatively straightforward test, and they didn't make it. In fact, the expectations, just the way the votes were counted, it looked like they're going to win it, and then they lost, and that's, just the way the votes were counted. But we'll see. I mean, there's always a lot of talk when people in these situations where people say, "Oh yeah, this guy's going to go," and we went through this with Christie, and when push comes to shove, there are few people who will actually publicly put their name out and say this leader should resign. And so if we see that is, raises up several levels. Haven't seen that yet. The
Yeah.
first stage is unnamed sources say,
Yes.
and then someone
And
very
escalate.
close to someone says, and then some backbencher comes out of the blue who realizes they have no hope of winning and they have nothing to lose and they go for it. But
So this has been burbling near the surface for a while, I think, since the last caucus retreat in London, Ontario, where I think it was reported that there were members saying the close proxy of that, right? My constituents are calling for you to step down. And I think this feels, if he can keep it from going any further from here, I'd be surprised.
Well, there's a provincial analogy here, and maybe we can segue to
Yeah.
politics.
Yeah, and that's what I was
Take Sarah
actually
off
going
the
to.
hot
Yes.
seat. Is obviously, Kevin Falcon's going through a similar thing where the poll numbers suck, and he's lost a few caucus members, but most of the caucus is still sticking with him.
Yeah.
And you actually don't. I mean, there have been significant defections, but they're still in the single digits, and yet over 20 MLAs are standing behind him. So it's not easy getting rid of a leader, because it actually takes a lot of fortitude and betrayal in a way, right? Like, it's like you are their teammate, but now you're saying you don't want to be their teammate anymore, and that's hard. So yeah, for Trudeau, maybe they aren't going to step up and do that. Maybe they're not going to do it. Maybe he's got the force of will to keep everybody together until he can show them a way out of this thing.
Well, can I bring up the one other point I wanted to make on this related to Trudeau and his reaction is, regardless of what he does next, I wanted to point out, so we had our guest Michael Bryant on a few episodes back, who actually held this riding provincially. And I think it's interesting to note in the 2018 election, similar context, Ontario Liberal brand was cratering. That riding, which has really similar borders, that riding went NDP. So I think it's really important to understand that this is as much about what's going on with the Liberals as I think some success Poilievre is having in landing a message that's resonating with people, in animating voters to believe he can run the country.
Well, I think it's interesting in that, you touch on something interesting, that messaging is really important right now, and PM's message didn't get through in St. Paul's, right? Didn't get through. So more about him, less about perhaps what he has done, his record, what he's trying to do. You know, nobody talks about the pandemic anymore, or what the NDP did or the federal Liberals did during that tough time. What I think is different between what Kevin is going through and what PM is going through is that I don't think that Kevin ever walked into that expecting, you know, those defections. And I thought, you know, when he was elected leader, he was someone with experience. He's got a business background. He was going to come in. He was a contrast to EB. And none of that has kind of stuck right now. Like from, you know, the day he became leader to now, it's been focused on just keeping the party together, really, and keeping the base happy. And you can only keep your base happy for so long without losing the undecided. And what I think Kevin needs to do right now is speak to the undecided. And I think the PM's not reaching the undecided. And that's something that, you know, with reflection, I think can be corrected. Because right now, Poilievre's filling up the space.
Is that about holding the center?
So two leaders having trouble getting their message out, you know, Trudeau and Falcon, and Research Co has a poll out today. Provincially, move over provincially here, which has it at NDP 40, BC Conservatives 33, Greens 15, BC United 11. And just more of the same. Bad news, frankly, for BC United. I mean, again, draw the parallel Falcon and Trudeau. They both have been going down, and they've got to, you know, change the narrative. And in either case, I'm not sure what either of them does to do that. Like it will require some luck. It will require mistakes from other parties.
I was going to say unforced errors from the other parties. You know, stop.
Which are in short supply.
Yeah, and stop focusing on Rustad, right? Like just let that's yesterday's news. Those defections are yesterday's news, and get your policy out. But how, you're right, Mike, and is anyone listening, and does anyone care? It's a much juicier story to hear that the party's, you know, imploding as the media is kind of painting it to be. But I think the MLAs are, from what I'm hearing and you know, talking to people, I think you're right. I think the MLAs are there to stay. You know, we're 3 months out. I think it's safe to say Kevin's there to stay. And, you know, how do you right the ship? And at what point are British Columbians going to be paying attention? Like I can say as a federal Liberal, like looking at Rustad's VBOT chat and, you know, what he was highlighting there's nothing there that resonates with me. It seems like he's trying to turn the clock back to a time where things were better. We're never going to be in that same kind of position as a province again.
So you're a federal Liberal, and you're pretty open about that. And you've been a BC Liberal.
Yes, I'm both. I'm both. Right?
So you are this exotic species of liberals that are there's some will stay with BC United, as many are going to the NDP. Some may go to the BC Conservatives. Like, what's your sense of people like you who have been active federal Liberals and how they're dealing with the shakeup in provincial politics right now?
It's tough. It's really tough. I can say for myself, you know, me being where I sit, John Rustad doesn't resonate with me. He doesn't. The Premier hasn't done a terrible job on things. And where Kevin sits now on some policies, you know, he really needs to get those policies out there to speak to federal Liberals, because honestly, it's been sort of maintaining that conservative base. There hasn't been a home. It's almost like the federal Liberal have been kind of taken for granted because they couldn't possibly be with the NDP. And yeah, it's tough. I would say if I was to speculate, I think a lot is bled off to the NDP. And I think the people who are staying are more probably center and socially minded, but fiscally responsible. So how many of those Liberals are left? Right.
So Kevin Falcon really has been trying for some time now, I think, to turn the discussion back to policy and to get some oxygen for his policies. I'm wondering, is there anything you've seen him do that you think has punched through or has had the potential to punch through maybe once we get through, the dust is settled a bit on this free enterprise fight?
Yeah, I think he's come out recently in days about tax policy and a few other things. And I think the week before on daycare and those are sort of middle of the road issues now. I mean, housing used to be a left-wing issue. It's a real-time everyone issue. It's all over the place. And that was one thing that I found surprising about Rustad's take, is that on housing, he just wants to rip everything up that the premier and the federal government and the prime minister are trying to do. At least they're trying to do something, right? There's a big issue here. So Kevin hasn't come out against housing policy. He has different ideas about it. I just think the story has been more about the party and less about Kevin and policy, and that's a problem, right?
Well, the Conservatives did have their debutante ball last week at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. I wasn't there. Don't think you were there either, Kate or Sarah.
I was not there, no, and I want to know what they served as snacks.
I have reports from the front. Apparently there were finger foods and a free beer ticket or a drink ticket for people.
Oh,
so
it's 3 p.m.
3 o'clock events. You got to be nimble. Well done, Board of Trade. The good people of the Board of Trade did chow down on some Rustadian policy. Rustadian?
Let's go with it.
Rustadian.
Rustic
policy.
Rust.
Among them, he reiterated they would axe the carbon tax, lower taxes in general, tackle government debt, remove clean BC restrictions that hamper LNG development, reform stumpage system, reverse course on drug decriminalization, etc., etc., etc. So he went through a lot of the stuff that we've been hearing for months, coming from Rustad, and I guess we'll have to wait for the reviews. I mean, this was kind of probably the first time he's had a major address downtown since he's kind of shot up in the polls. And not that downtown decides what happens in the province of BC. In fact, seldom does. But there are influencers here, and it may influence fundraising. It may influence some of the elites and how they respond to the next few months.
Does it work? Like, it's such a consistent tear it down message, right? Like, everything's about stop, undo, stop. And I know there's some of that to Poilievre, but I think Rustad particularly, and I'm just trying to think what we know of his policy agenda that is to build something or to offer something. And I can't think of anything.
A policy to build something?
Yeah, to make something or to offer something. Like, it's all about undoing, like, axe the carbon tax. I guess on
he's building a monument to common sense, Kate. that's what's happening. Didn't you know? Don't you have the sense to know that?
Well, apparently not.
I think it's.
Well, he's also building is some other new candidates, and he did announce on the same day as the Board of Trade that Linda Hepner, the former mayor of Surrey, who may well be another tough grandma from Surrey, is running as the candidate for the Conservatives in Surrey Serpentine, best named riding in British Columbia, against Baltesh Dillon. And then at the same day, Puneet Sandar, the BC United candidate, dropped out for family reasons. Now, the Linda Hepner Baltesh Dillon fight shaping up to be a real marquee battle. It's a swing riding, 2 high-profile candidates. Let's get the popcorn out and watch that one.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a favorite for sure. I'm really curious about it. I think both stellar candidates for different reasons. I think that Evie really is trying to shore up his bench strength. I think Baltesh does that in the sense of experience. He's somebody that's well known in the community. He has a long track record of successful track record in policing. Police reform is top of mind in British Columbia in terms of policy discussions and the sort of day-to-day operations of government. So I don't know him personally, but I hear that he's got good support in the community, but that can't be taken for granted, and it is not guaranteed. So it'll be very interesting. And then I think with Linda Hepner, she's got great brand recognition. And I think Rustad, again, shoring up his own bench, trying to hang some good candidates out in the window and see what comes of it. But, you know, what can she offer? I think that's, you know, we'll see. So yes, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a very, very interesting riding to watch, and one of the more interesting races in the province for sure.
It's definitely interesting 1-2 punch in Surrey that they've brought in the last couple of weeks with Sturco and Hepner. So we'll see if they've got another if there's another shoe to drop there. Kate?
No, I was just going to say we should mention the breaking news just as we're taping that Adam Olsen will not be seeking re-election for the Greens, which raises the question of who's likely to be left standing in the fall for the Greens.
Yeah, it's that's a real loss for the legislature, in my opinion. Adam Olsen, I think, is a highly regarded MLA. Obviously, First Nations, one of the 6 First Nations or 7 First Nations that have been elected in the history of BC legislature, which is noteworthy. He's been there for 7 years, so I think it'd be very hard for the Greens to hold that seat. So all of a sudden, that is a seat that rockets to the top of the swing list, probably for the NDP and the Conservatives, who I think have designs on it. I think the Conservatives are running a federal Conservative candidate in that riding. And the federal Conservatives also, the federal Conservative candidate is running provincially. The federal Conservatives held that seat federally for quite a few years with Gary Lund. And so they've got a base of support there. So that's all of a sudden, it's amazing when someone makes a personal decision and the whole political calculus changes.
Yeah, someone with such a strong, probably one of the stronger personal political brands in the province too, like Adam Olsen. It really changes the calculus for the riding.
I mean, it puts a lot more focus for the Greens on the West Van Sea to Sky riding, where they lost by about 30 votes last election to Jordan Sturdy, and the same Green candidates running again, Jeremy Valarote, I have probably butchering the pronunciation of his last name, who's running again, and they're going to really need that. And Sonia Furstenau's in tough in Victoria Beacon Hill. So, we, for the first time since 2013, there might be a legislature without a Green after the next election.
Yeah, which is shocking.
Right. So let's move this week too. We have a clipping this week. Our clipping this week is Keith Baldry, writing for Global News, with picking up on a topic I think you and I, Mike, brought up a bit with Stepan last week, just looking at sort of the fights that David Eby seems to be picking with Ottawa, the distance he seems to be building there. And I'll say Keith, picks up on that trend, and I think, points rightly to the fact that this might be an opportunity for Eby to distance himself from an unpopular brand of the federal Liberals, but also I think makes a point about how it's just good flex. It's just good flex to be able to show that compared to Rustad and Falcon, he's the guy who can speak on behalf of British Columbia. Sarah, have you been watching this trend too? Like, what do you think he's building some space?
It's funny, I do think it's a bit of a flex. A bit of a bun toss. At the end of the day, it's not a new message. It's, we in the West don't get our fair share from Ottawa. It's always about Ontario, Quebec, or the Atlantic, everybody except for us. And I think for Eby, it's smart politics. You're going after the federal government. You're going after a PM that's, having some challenges right now in the polls. And you're standing up for British Columbians. BC likes that. British Columbians like a leader that is seen as standing up and trying to get our fair share. I think also he's distancing himself from, the squabbling that's going on between the BC United and the Conservatives. Let them fight it out. And meanwhile, I'm doing my job. But what I think is interesting, like how much, and it'd be interesting to hear what you guys think, but how much runway does he have here? Because the election is not far away, and I'm not very clear on what he's campaigning on yet. That's not sort of shining through for me as a voter. So sure, you can pick your fights, but at the end of the day, where's your policy and what direction are you taking us in this next term?
Well, it's funny because he does seem to be like, he's like, there's a bit of a juxtaposition in like, I feel like he's like, the tenor he's presenting is I'm fighting with Ottawa. And then I feel like the PM's response is like, no, it's all cool. We're good. We're
Totally. We're going to work together on this. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, as we talked about last week, he has to be a little bit careful not to drive Liberal voters away from him, at the same time attacking the government.
Yeah.
And he's basically saying, where's the pork, when it comes down to it.
It's not dissimilar to his argument, and I think he sent a letter to the Bank of Governor or Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklin saying like, look, you need to consider what's going on with the economy. He knows full and well that it's an independent institution, but again, it shows that he's standing up for British Columbians. So it's just part of the playbook, I think, and I think at the end of the day, it just shows
he
that
sent a letter.
So
he's voicing some concerns. So
Sure.
Was it strongly worded though? Was it strongly worded?
I believe some things were underlined and some things were italicized.
There was bold.
Some were bolded.
And
there. Oh, okay, we have to take this seriously.
Really
guys.
important stuff was 14-point font, I believe.
Yep. Some all caps.
And then he signed it, especially you can see it, like the ballpoint going through the paper a bit.
So he signed it himself.
Yeah.
So imagine what step 2 is going to look like. Oh boy. But it's not like okay, we go back. Not that it worked, but Glenn Clark. There we said it. Glenn Clark.
Ding ding ding. Every episode, we promise guests.
There's a Glenn Clark reference every episode.
I want a bingo card for next time.
1997, when he took on the federal government.
Yes,
the
he did.
federal Liberal government of the day.
Yes, he did.
He threatened to seize the weapons testing range.
That's
I think, and actually brought in legislation, and the feds had to expropriate the land back from the province to defend the national defense asset. That's pretty hardcore. That's pretty hardcore.
That's not what EB's doing here.
So sending a letter, is it written
in the 14-point font, Sarah?
I think the prime minister had to use lemon juice to read the letter because it's in invisible ink.
Yeah.
I don't know. Just seems it's a little bit of a pillow fight.
It is a little bit of a pillow fight. I think they picked up, it's interesting, the sort of temporary residence piece. Like, I think they're looking for themes around, like, give us our due, like, pay us our due kind of piece. Like, it seems like there is something they're really trying to surface there, which maybe, gets them out of a little bit of, you're disappointed by the size of our deficits. Well, we don't get any help with the Massey Tunnel, and we've got all these people coming into the province, and they just give money to Ontario and Quebec. Like, it's like, I can see what they're trying to do.
You're not going to win an election based on a fight on equalization payments, right?
Yeah. Like, what percentage of voters can even know what equalization payments are? I know like Albertans really get exercised about it, but
I think it sort of leads to a broader conversation about the fact that the PM and the federal government has become the lightning rod for all ills in Canadian society right now. When there's failures of municipal governments, there's failures of provincial governments, there's just failures of the three levels of government working together. And so I think at some point, you're the incumbent premier, you've got to have something to say, and it's got to be a little deeper than, I'm fighting with Ottawa for our fair share, and look what the other guys are doing, they're bad. And it's also very interesting to me how Rustad's riding some of this conservative wave, and I know you guys were talking about it with Neil in your last session about when there's a federal Liberal government, the provincial governments tend to change and whatnot. Like when Christie was in government, we had 4 female premiers, 4 strong female leaders, and I think we're
That's
down to no.
Things go in cycles, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, we don't get to say that though. It's not like it can't be an episodic thing that we have female first ministers.
True. Well, why don't we just go settle this argument at the minibar? I want to get personal and share my family's energy story. Black thermal coal. Over a century ago, my grandmother's family mined it under the Atlantic seabed off of Glace Bay, Nova Scotia. Some moved west to apply their skills to underground mining in Drumheller. That's where my grandparents met. There were dozens of coal mines in the Badlands, and my grandfather had the high-grade mine and the Rose Deer mine. Coal was how millions of Canadians heated their homes for generations. And when my mother was growing up in Vancouver, her home was heated by sawdust. Vancouver would have smog thicker than pea soup in the 1940s because of sawdust burning in households across the region. When I was a kid, our home in Haney, find that on a map, was heated by oil. The big oil truck used to come to our house to fill up our massive oil tank. When I was a high school kid, the gas network was extended to my neighborhood and our heating became a lot cleaner. Today, I lean on both gas and electricity for home heating. Fortis BC also has deep roots when it comes to energy in our communities. Their first hydroelectric dam was built near Nelson in 1897, and Fortis BC's Tilbury LNG facility has been safely operating in Delta for more than 50 years, storing energy for when our province needs it most. Today, gas infrastructure connects over 1 million homes and businesses throughout BC. And like the shift from coal to heating oil to natural gas, our province's energy system continues to change. Fortis BC is reducing greenhouse gas emissions by transitioning away from delivering conventional natural gas to delivering renewable and low-carbon gas. Gas, along with electricity, is an integral part of a diversified energy system. Thanks to Fortis BC for letting me share my family's energy story. What's yours? Fortis BC. Energy for a better future and a better podcast.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Sarah, I'm really excited to invite you around for this one. I know you often have shots to take and glasses to raise. Do you want to kick us off this week?
Sure. So my shot is at the Conservative ad that aired last night during the hockey game, featuring the tent cities. I think that was just in poor taste. So that's my shot. I do also have I want to raise a glass as well. Can I do that at the same time, or do we do our shots first?
Everyone always our guests always come when they want to do both. Go for it.
Raise a glass to the Oilers. That was a great game last night. Great series. I don't think that goalie stood on his head, and it was just tough, but it was very exciting.
So just want to confirm the Trudeau government did not have them renamed as the Edmonton Heat Pumps.
That's right.
God.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not imminent.
Just checking.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a like petition somewhere circulating to rename them.
Well,
Mike?
I'll jump in. I've got a double shot here today. First of all, I want to take a shot at the ridiculous proportional representation advocates who ran like 80 candidates in the St. Paul by-election. And the ballot is like, it's like it's like a scroll, that
was it 80?
falls off the end of the desk.
Yeah.
But it's just, and many of them got like 2 votes, 1 vote, 3 votes. It was a complete abusive process. Elections Canada, and if that's possible in BC too, they should crack down on it. Higher deposits. This is nonsense. It's unfair to the voters. It's just it's electoral vandalism. There you go. So enough of that. That's a double shot just for those guys. Now, my other shot is to the Trudeau government. I think, disclaimer, I've done some work in the past for this industry, but I believe the decision on salmon farming is a disgrace. And it's, somebody called me the other day and said, is there a parallel of a government that's closed down an industry before? Because that's what's going to happen with about 5,000 jobs on the coast. And if this was obviously in a liberal riding, it would never be happening. And they are imperiling thousands of jobs in one of the industries that has the highest Indigenous rate of employment of any industry. And I know there's strong feelings on this issue. I know lots of people are against the industry. I get it. But when it comes down to practical matters here and the economy and people's jobs, this is gone way too far. So more to come on this file. I believe the government will rue the day that it made that decision.
Okay, so when you brought that up, I was waiting to see whether you're taking a shot at the government for delaying the shutdown by 5 years or taking a stance against William Shatner.
I am very much
who
against
is amongst a
William Shatner.
large group.
I want to beam him out. I stand with my
that video
friends in the First Nations who support salmon farming, who view it as a critical part of their economic sustainability. And when they say close containment, it is a joke. It will never happen in British Columbia because we are a high cost jurisdiction, and it will be close containment will happen somewhere else in the world. If it ever happens, it will not happen here. So those jobs are, anyway.
It is
End of
happening.
rant. End of rant.
It is happening in the Yukon. It is happening in Manitoba.
Oh, come on. Not to the scale of what the
Sure.
I mean,
what's happening on our coast.
Greater environmental standards, absolutely. Let's work towards that. Can the industry do better? I'm sure they can. Every industry can, but they've done something here that's very draconian and frankly unprecedented.
So and there's a lot of employment, like First Nations employment. But is there any ownership? Like because a lot of these are
absolutely.
big international, but a lot of them are kind of international, European based. Like,
what's wrong with that? I mean, it's foreign investment. We used to try to attract that in Canada, but yes,
I'm not against foreign investment, but I think if you're going to use that as a defense, maybe we should ask questions about what proportion and how we want to.
Well, there are significant. I'm sure they'd be happy to tell you, but there are significant Indigenous deals involved. I think some are equity, some are revenue shares, but the future of that industry is Indigenous. There's no doubt about it. It has to be. So I'm just, anyways, I've said enough.
Okay. We're beaming you out. It's a good topic though, Mike. And
it's a really good topic, and there's lots to it. Yeah.
We'll come back to it. We will definitely come back to it. I'll close this out with a glass. We're leaving on a upward note this week, Gus. I'm going to raise my glass to the staff at the City of Vancouver who have proposed getting rid of parking minimums. We've talked about this before. I think if Geoff was here, he'd gasp and clutch his pearls. I think he is a bit more supportive of parking minimums, but we'll probably have that debate when we get back. I think it is an enormous barrier to building, and when you have a cost of living in a downtown core, that as we do, and need the density we need, we have to rethink how we move around. So I am glad to see that my glass is raised.
Okay, hope I don't have to find a parking spot in your neighborhood.
So Mike's never coming over ever.
You can ride your bike over, Mike.
My scooter.
Your scooter, yeah. Also, I live close to transit. You are welcome to join me on the SkyTrain.
Well,
all right, that wraps us up. On that happy note, transit rides, Hotel Pacific transit rides. That wraps us up for another episode of Hotel Pacifico. I want to thank our guest. We have two guests today. I want to thank our guests for joining us, Dan, and Daniel Marshall, and then I want to thank Sarah Sidhu also for joining us in the Strategy Suite. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and to Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.